back to 2013. And so Colorado is very unique in that sense to have a legislated position that supports partnerships.
And Chris Greer.
Sorry about that. Sometimes I can't get off mute. I'm Chris Greer, and I'm the Associate Provost at Fort Lewis College, and I'm a SAC Prime member.
If you are not a panelist, if you don't mind turning your cameras off and muting yourselves, please. And then if you have a question, if you will type it in the chat, then our co-hosts, moderators can help us field those. And we will have time at the end. Also, I'm going to share my screen. And if you're not familiar with Zoom, when I start sharing my screen, you'll see two boxes, one that has the PowerPoint that I'm going to share wherever I left it, and one that will have the face of the speaker, and so you can see that. And you can toggle on the little boxes in the top right corner, and it'll change the size of the picture that you see, so you can see that the person is talking, or you can see the whole group of everyone. And you can also switch and toggle back and forth between the size of the PowerPoint and the people speaking, if that's helpful. So I'm trying to show you my PowerPoint though. How to do that? It's asking me which screen, and this is neither. Hang on just a second. Thanks for your patience, all. There we go. It's asking me which screen, and this ain't it. Let's see. That's the view from my office. And that's not the right screen. Help me, Darcy.
I'm seeing your PowerPoint.
Oh, you are? Oh, good.
Yep, we're seeing Colorado educator preparation providers.
Wonderful. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, so we had are fortunate to have some great folks joining us. And I will call on you and have you introduce yourselves, if you would, please. Jeff Paquette.
Sorry, now I think you can hear me. Thanks, Britt, and everybody. Welcome. My name is Jeff Paquette. I am the Associate Dean and Director of the School of Education at CSU Pueblo. Been there about 20 years. Not sure how much more you want, Britt.
That's great. Thank you. Cindy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cindy Gutierrez. I'm the Director of the Office of Partnerships and Clinical Teacher Education at the University of Colorado, Denver.
Liz.
Hi, it's nice to see everyone. My name is Liz Qualman, and I am the Director of Teacher Education at Colorado Mountain College. I've been with CMC since 2014, but this is my third year in the role as Director.
Great. Angela?
Hi, everyone. Britt, thanks so much for organizing this. I'm an assistant professor and key advisor of our early childhood teacher licensure programs at CSU.
Thank you. Kimberly.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all. My name's Kim. I am an assistant professor of practice at Relay Graduate School of Education.
Thank you. And Kelly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Woodrow. I am a professor of culturally and linguistically diverse education at Regis University.
Thank you all. So just for a little history and context, we met as with prep providers last November. We were talking about the best practices report that we had to write. We meaning CDHE and CDE around educator preparation was statutorily required from a bill that Senator Todd wrote. And we did write that and put that together. And one of the best practices and principles, of course, had to do with family engagement. That one of the things that we think is really important in Colorado is that teacher preparation programs include a focus on family engagement strategies. Also, a part of that law required prep programs to respond with their plans for implementation. And of course, several of our prep programs already do this really well. So prep programs rated themselves, did a bit of a self-assessment and rated themselves on how well they think they implement these practices already, and put together their own goals and then 3-year plans for implementation. And the folks before you were all at universities that are already doing family engagement really well. And so I wanted you to be able to hear from them. And then one of the other things that we've learned is that it wasn't only important to us, it's important to in-service teachers. And one thing that made that glaringly apparent was coronavirus. So recently there have been a couple of needs assessments in the state since coronavirus to really reach out to school districts and teachers and see what the needs were. For example, Colorado Department of Ed and CEI did a needs assessment that went out to all the districts in the state. They had 370 respondents that covered 91% of our districts and BOCES. And they asked what the top needs were. And as you can imagine, the top needs across the state were student and emotional support, technology needs for delivering remote learning, online instructional support for teachers, and family engagement practices. And it came up in all 8 regions of the state that family engagement practices was one of the top needs. Early Milestones did a similar needs assessment with early childhood educators. They did a huge study across center-based programs, in-home daycare, and also school district preschools. They had 6,000 respondents from over 1,200 providers. And also family engagement came up as a strong need from 63% of the teachers and caregivers. They asked for extra support in that. So I think that was just really telling that that's one of the things that is going to be important to make sure we're including in preparation programs. And so I'm thankful for you all as leaders for doing that well. So I'll just go through my questions here and then ask each one of you to respond, if you would, please. And I'll start with Jeff, if you don't mind, please. Can you talk about how your institution is incorporating family engagement into your prep programs?
Sure. Thanks again, Britt. So I guess what I'll say about this is we incorporate family engagement most successfully through actual course assignments that we've embedded into the program that are grounded in our solid partnerships. Okay, so really important elements to this. First of all, in the class itself, we go through sort of the research basis, right? We want to do these things so that they are in line with what our research says about what are going to be the most successful things. So we get that research basis established with the students first. And then the real key thing that we also want to pass along is authenticity. We want the family engagement to be real, not hypothetical. We don't want to just brainstorm about, how you might engage family. We want you to actually engage family. And so how we've done that is by building these partnerships with different entities in our area. So we want these real positive contributions with our students, because those are the most powerful. They help make sure that these pre-service teachers are better trained. It helps retain them because they feel like this is a real highlight of the program. And again, it just continues to build and maintain partnerships that we need for field experience and everything else moving forward. So the research basis is there, the authenticity is there, And then we also want to make them regular, that is, scheduled, so that people know that they're coming and can expect them. Basically, what we want to do is build this holistic set of family engagement opportunities, so that people have, if they can't make it to one, they might make it to another, but they know that there are lots of times that they might be able to join us. And so those are the three prongs of how we incorporate family engagement in our program. And some examples that I just thought I would share with you that sort of fit these are our family math and science nights. We do those at least once a semester. We do a family literacy night at least once a semester. We also do other kinds of family nights or day events, like our culturally and linguistically diverse night or day event. We have a class that puts on a math madness event for elementary kids, and that's for about a month. It's once a week every month well, yes. So it's once a week for a month that they actually attend this and learn a lot of cool math stuff. We also established the first restorative justice circles in the Pueblo school districts over the last few years, which has been really exciting. We partner with early childhood ed folks like Head Start to present STEAM activities that can be done with families. We just got through with a big push to do some online ones where we got volunteers to put together some STEAM centers and sent home all the materials with the kids so that this could be done at home with families. And then the families got to fill out volunteer sheets, and it was really kind of cool. We do lots of other things, like with the Steelworks Museum, Catamount Institute. Another big, well-attended family event is our design and robotics competitions. So a lot of times the students in these families like to, participate in like these science competitions that are available. We also have one that's robotics centered. It's the Wonder Workshop event, if any of you are familiar with Dash and Q. But we also do other kinds of family diversity projects just from within the course assignments themselves. So each individual student in a class will have to come up with their own individual family engagement activity project that, again, has to be real and authentic. And so they come up with their own small things that they do. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. So to recap, research basis for the students, making it authentic with our partners, and making it regular so that they can expect it.
That's awesome, Jeff. Thanks so much. Cindy?
Yeah, thanks. It's kind of fun to be on a panel so we can hear everybody's ideas. So I'm taking a lot of notes as you were talking there, Jeff. So at CU Denver, we've really committed ourselves to really thinking about preparing candidates for family and community engagement in a very systemic way. So it wasn't just a single class or a single field experience, but we really stepped back and asked ourselves, what are the key competencies that we want our candidates to come out of the program with? And then how can we design both clinical based experiences and course-based experiences and exposure to the research and the knowledge base that they need to know so that they're well prepared in that area. And I think the other lens that we bring to the work is we have such a deep focus on diversity, equity, and social justice that we work very hard to make sure to situate all of our work with families and communities from a very asset-oriented perspective, really helping our candidates develop that asset orientation to their work, really seeking to understand the funds of knowledge that children and families bring to schools and to the classroom. And it's the teacher's job to figure those out and how do they tap into those in order to leverage them in supporting academic and socio-emotional overall well-being for kids. And so from that lens, we've really thought really explicitly where our first clinical experience for our students doesn't start in a school, it starts in community-based partnerships. So we have all of our students working in community-based organizations for 60 hours in their first semester of the program. And in those relationships, they're really getting to make relationships with children and families outside of the confines of what we think about from a schooling perspective, which can further influence some deficit perspectives. So we start there and start to help them understand how children and families are situated in an ecological systems model, using Bronfenbrenner and a variety of other kinds of resources. And then we start to thread that initial learning through a variety of courses. Again, having that asset-based orientation there, really doing a lot of the critical work that we need to do with candidates around power, privilege, and bias, and unpacking a lot of the sociocultural contexts that have elevated some of the unfortunate perspectives on working with diverse families and children. We do then further embed, like Jeff said, really thinking about the assignments in our courses. We have a really specific course that's completely around collaboration. And it's a collaboration course that really looks at that intersection for all teachers between teacher, student, families, and other professionals in the building, so that they don't see themselves on an island. It's just my job, my classroom, my students, right? That there is a collective around how we're really working to support children. And then it all culminates, our deep partnership work at CU Denver for almost 30 years now has led to really robust partnerships with single schools. So we have a network of professional development schools where our candidates are embedded in their school-based clinical experiences. And we really work to tap into the assets and the approaches that those schools are utilizing to help our candidates become great collaborators with families. So if the vast majority of the schools we partner with have family community liaisons, that's such a great person for our candidates to learn from. So we're really intentional about bringing that person into the fold of working with our candidates in that school. All of our candidates do community walks to really understand the community writ large, engage with different elders in the community and families with a wide variety of wisdom to bring to bear on that work. So we're always just really thoughtful of how we are very much intentional about threading that notion of what does it mean to partner with families and communities throughout your program, and how that ultimately influences what you do in your own instruction.
That's great, Cindy. Thank you. I love the community walks. Liz.
Hi, Cindy, I'm probably going to echo a lot of what you said, and Jeff the same. So I'll try to point out kind of maybe what's unique to CMC, but I'll start with that CMC was developed, our teacher education program was developed specifically to train a diverse teacher workforce in our local communities in the mountains. So most of our students come right out of our K-12 school districts. Occasionally we'll have students who move in from elsewhere, but for the most part, they are the children of families that we've been trying to engage in our local districts. So it's kind of a nice situation where a lot of our students know so many of the families that they are working with as they are student teaching in our partnering schools. One of the things about our program that it was very important when we developed it was to have a really strong culturally and linguistically diverse education thread. And within that thread, aside from the instructional components, the pillar of building relationships is very, very important to our program. Relationships with instructors and students, relationships with our partnering schools, and then relationships with the students in those schools and their families. So those are very, very important to us. And as you heard Cindy talk about, we spend a lot of time on social justice issues within that CLD thread of asset-based thinking rather than deficit-based thinking, and really working on anti-racist behaviors, as well as looking at research that probably has deficit thinking in it because it's old, and then being critical about what are the best practices now that elevate our students, the students they're working with, and the families that we're working with as well. So we have systems, we have courses, and I'll just give an example of something specific that our students do that I think is really important. Oftentimes school districts feel obligated to pull families in, but they don't often go out to see families. So in a couple of our classes, we ask our students to do home visits. And the power in building relationships when an educator goes to visit the home of a student, meet their family, and really focus on the strengths and assets that that family has, the resources available to them, rather than going there and being critical about what maybe some of the deficits would be. We only focus on the rich assets that are available to the students. And I have to say that those experiences for our student teachers are incredibly powerful for preparing them for the classroom. They oftentimes stay in touch with the students and their families well after the course has ended. It definitely creates a sense of belonging. And then we celebrate those home visits by bringing the families to our campuses to celebrate at the end of the course with other families and their students in just a presentation about how awesome their child is. And so that's just an example of how we go out and we bring in, because I think both are important. And I think that in the dominant culture we live in, sometimes the assumption is, oh, well, we have to bring you to us because we're the ones that hold all the resources. But honestly, so many of our students and their families have tremendous resources that we as institutions don't uncover often enough to celebrate. So that's a really important thread for us.
That's awesome, Liz. Thanks so much. Angela, please.
Hi, this is fantastic. It sounds like we've got a lot of promising practices happening in Colorado. So it's really reaffirming and reassuring and taking lots of great notes. So thanks for the ideas. I thought I'd start off by sharing a quote that's embedded in one of the course texts that we have in our program. I think it captures the messaging that we would like for our teacher candidates to adopt into their practice. And sort of mess about with it while they're in their teacher preparation program. And so the quote says, "Only when professionals understand culturally sensitive care and are in close communication with families can they know how to work towards positive outcomes for children's identities, sense of belonging, and cultural competence." And this really is the messaging and thinking about how we can teach children in the context of their families, and then what does that mean for teacher development. And we situate that, first and foremost in family-centered practices, but connect it to culturally responsive practices and culturally sustaining practices throughout the scope and sequence of our program. So just as the other three colleagues mentioned, that we are also embedded in professional development schools. And that really is a key piece to that, is to get teacher candidates working with children and families early and often, and making sure that the alignment of the textbooks and the assignments ask teacher candidates to do the good work. And we know that teacher candidates need the language and tools, right, to sustain those practices. And thinking, I think that it's important to think creatively about how we can partner with families. What does that look like in the context of the children and the communities that you're teaching in, and seeing and valuing families as partners. And so similar to the family ecological theory, we spend quite a bit of time of doing family studies, getting to know the communities that you're teaching in, building family ecology maps, and learning how to ask the right questions. Like when you have those moments with families, whether they're home visiting or home visits or parent-teacher conferences or a family night. But one of the exercises that we do often in our program is having teacher candidates ask families to walk them through a 24-hour day in the life of the family, and learning how, taking that one step further and what we learned from those interviews, how can we intentionally embed that into the classroom? And so we know that family-centered practices works to achieve or to close achievement gaps, but also thinking about how can we close inequitable learning experiences in the family or in the classroom by leveraging what we learned from families in those interviews, and work to connecting family goals and family culture in curricular experiences in the classroom. And so it is also, that requires our teacher candidates to do a lot of identity work, which I think Cindy mentioned as well, that we have to think about and give teacher candidates opportunity to reflect on their own identities and how their identities interact with the children and families that they're working with, while in our program, but also to think about how family-centered practices are situated not only in their philosophy of teaching and in their pedagogical expertise, but also to have the skills that when they need a solution or they're in need of a strategy that's outside of their pedagogical training or outside of their licensure, that I think it's important that, or at least we value those critical skills in partnering with other professionals in the building and in the community. That teachers, see themselves not only as resources for families and children, but that they also have the skill to, connect with a speech language pathologist or a counselor or a community resource to get families connected. So those are some of the key things. And then I'll add some maybe key understandings, right? And really sort of pumping the brakes on the conversation and thinking about the scope and sequence of teacher development and really defining family system theories and naming varying family systems and varying levels of family functioning and varying styles of family-centered practices, because there are multiple to choose from. And so I think that, I think in a nutshell, those are the things that we do at CSU, and super excited about all of the fun ideas that folks have shared. So thanks for that.
Very great idea. I want to talk more about sharing ideas, but I am learning so much from you all. So thank you. Kimberly.
Hi, everyone. Just like Cindy and Angela, I am happy to be here and get to hear and learn from all the great work you all are doing too. I want to speak to both things that Relay traditionally does and things that we have added this year due to online learning with incorporating family engagement. So one thing that our national team created this year in response to the pandemic is a distance learning toolkit, which includes a section on culturally responsive family engagement, providing tips and resources for reaching out to families virtually. And so we share this with all of our teacher candidates early on in both years 1 and year 2 of our program. Something we do annually is we have a caregiver panel, which we're going to have to do online this year. But it's always really beneficial, obviously, for our teacher candidates to actually hear from caregivers about the importance and also what is effective in reaching out to families. So that's something we're looking forward to this spring. I work with year 1 of our program. I know that in year 2, we also engage with community asset building and culturally and linguistically diverse students as big foci. But in year 1 of the program, I can speak to definitely the coursework in year 1. So our first module is on exploring teacher identity foundations and getting to know students and their families. And in this module, students really start by exploring their identities and their biases and how those interactions, how their identities and biases really affect their interactions with and relationships with families. And we discuss research and rationale for the value behind family relationships and provide different strategies for connecting with families. That leads to our very first assignment in year 1, which is around relationship building evidence, which we modified this year to provide digital options for students, to include digital options for how students can share their relationship building evidence. And the focus here is not just that students are able to submit evidence of their family engagement, but there's a really big, it really centers on also their reflections on what they learned from that family engagement and ultimately the impact on their classrooms. So they have to reflect based on their learning. What are they noticing for how their relationships with students have changed based on their family engagement. Most of our year 1 students are what we call residents, and so they are working with a mentor teacher throughout the year and gradually increasing responsibility in their classrooms to become full-time teachers of record. And so for our teacher residents, we have what's called gateways. And these are different checkpoints that our residents need to pass in order to show that they're on track to becoming that full-time teacher of record. And so Gateway 1, which is in this fall, we really focus on teacher mindsets. And two of the mindsets that we focus on are engagement and equity. And so residents need to provide evidence that they are engaging with families in a very inclusive and culturally responsive way. And we work with our residents weekly in what we call deliberate practice, where they come to us and practice teaching skills. And in our deliberate practice sessions, we have what we call mindset workouts, where we have students, our teacher candidates, reflect on what they're doing to engage families and reflect on their progress to engage. And our residents mentors also provide feedback directly to our teacher candidates on their progress in equity and engagement. And if our teacher candidates are not on track to engage with families and show these mindsets, the relay advisor, along with the mentor teacher, create a really targeted action plan to help our residents get back on track with this mindset. So those are a few things that we're thinking about in year one and trying to modify in this distance learning space.
Thanks, Kimberly. That's great. Kelly.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here and hear all these great different ideas. And it's nice that we have a mix of different providers and how who you're interfacing with. I'm going to be speaking a little bit about our post-traditional programs. So those would be our graduate students in the CLD program, in our special ed master's program, and in our post-traditional licensure program, which is a master's program, students coming back to get their degree in education. And we do thread family engagement throughout our courses, but we have a very specific, Regis University is a Jesuit institution, and it's a value-based institution. And so we have a specific course where the theory is built first before they really explore it within some of their methods courses. So our course is diversity, equity, and social justice. And in that course, we build, and many of you have spoken to this already, where we build those concepts about privilege and power and oppression. And we have students examine their own social identity and how it intersects with concepts such as race and all those other social constructs. And then we think about how that impacts our beliefs and values and how that can be translated into our practices and our interactions with others. So we're very, very intentional about building this background before we get to the family engagement practices. So we look at forms of bias in statements in schools and curriculum, hidden curriculum, and then all the way up to how sometimes districts can favor particular populations. So we look at Pinellas County and different orientations to students from school boards and things like that. So students can understand how systematically this can and structurally this might look beyond just their classroom. Many of the students we're working with will become leaders within their districts and schools. So we want to make sure they have a really strong understanding of how that can play out in a lot of different ways. We like to look at the deficit, asset, and structural perspectives and how that manifests in both the classroom and also narratives about families and communities. We look at the opportunity gap and examine assets and resources in the educator's own schools, either current or future. Students generally create a map of their school or their practicum placement where they identify what kind of resources and assets are available. They also look for opportunity gaps that are highlighted within the literature as being impactful on families. So that students have a really strong understanding. And then we have a discussion about how you can share out that information with our stakeholders within our school communities. And like many of the other programs, we move on to concepts such as funds of knowledge. and Yasso's model of sources of community cultural wealth. Students are really resonating with Chris Emden's reality pedagogy, with kind of bringing together all of those components in a way that is engaging to them in thinking about their practice. So in one of his taglines that my students always pull out is they are needing to do this kind of work in the communities with their families in order to meet their students on their own cultural and emotional turf. And students always pull that quote out. It really resonates with them. And he argues that educators need to be present in the spaces that make students who they are, away from our institutions. And that's one of the mindset shifts that we work with our students, is to make sure that there's an understanding of that holistic, the student as a whole, and within that ecological framework, like you all have mentioned already. And then we consider the family engagement. So once we've kind of explored all of those concepts and really seeded our understandings in those concepts, we move on to parent and family engagement. And we use, and it was referenced yesterday in Dr. Sanders' presentation, but we use the Bataquano-Lopez equity issues and parental and community involvement in schools as a kind of an anchor for the literature around how different schools and communities can be engaged. And then from there, we look at different frameworks for family engagement and teacher partnership. We look at Joyce Epstein's notion of spheres of influence, and her 6 different lines of possible parent engagement to start to think outside of these very traditional notions of engagement. And then we take Karen Mapp's culturally responsive dual capacity model of family and community engagement, and we explore and dissect all of the different components of that model. And then we take the case studies that are offered within that, within those resources, and have students apply the model to those case studies, and then have conversations about what kinds of things might we use in our own schools with our own families to leverage some of these new understandings that we have about what parent and community engagement might look like, and what capacity building might look like within our communities and our schools. And then Britt, you had mentioned something about within the COVID context, and I just wanted to share that we are hearing from our students that are in service that there are really different experiences they're having with family engagement that's very different than what they've ever had in a traditional schooling context. So in some cases, they're seeing families, a parent, a caregiver sitting alongside the student and really educating them alongside the alongside the pupil that they're focused on. And then also having challenges, of course, connecting. And my students have highlighted the talking points application on your phones to be able to do multilingual texts, and are finding that to be a really helpful resource to connect with their linguistically diverse families. So those are just a few ways, and then I kind of saved some of the activities for the second question.
I muted Kelly instead of unmuting me, but thank you so much, Kelly. That is awesome. I am so thankful for you guys, and what a great opportunity. You absolutely are nailing this in your programs. Such a great opportunity for everyone here to be able to learn from you. And that was really the point of our kind of November convenings, is just such a great opportunity for everyone to learn from and with each other. So it's also a great opportunity for me to plug one more thing, and that's we're hoping that we can create a community of practice specifically around family community and school partnership. And if you all would consider being a part of that, we certainly would be great leaders and amazing folks for the others who have already agreed to join to learn from. So we love this opportunity. We don't get together much. I think we have a unique opportunity during COVID that now that we're all so good at Zoom, we can bring people like yourselves from, statewide to be able to do this work together. And I am so thankful for you. The second question then is, how are you helping your candidates transfer that information that you're incorporating about family engagement into the diversity and equity issues that can arise in their own classrooms? And unfortunately, we have about just over 15 minutes left. So if you could try to keep this answer to about 2 minutes, then we'll see if folks have any questions. Jeff, if you don't mind going first again, please.
No problem. Thanks. I will try to edit this down a little bit because a lot of what I would say here has already been said, 2 or 3 times by my colleagues, which is great. It actually sort of reaffirms what I'm doing with our program. And so that's nice as well. But really how we're hoping to transfer this into our students' own classrooms later on is very tightly connected to what I said before. So to refresh your memory a little bit, what we tried to do is establish that very systematic, lots of opportunities for family engagement out there with real, authentic, contributions and opportunities. And so when these students are able to practice what we preach, right? I mean, that's sort of it. They're more likely to carry that into their own classrooms. You all know this, the research on this is pretty solid. And so we wanted to give them these opportunities to do this often enough that it became part of their normal practice. And so that's sort of the heart of the theme, which is nothing new to any of you. But as some of my colleagues have said, Liz and others, here in Pueblo, about 80% of all of the teachers in the 2 main school districts get some degree of training from CSU Pueblo. And so, if we can really get that body of teachers out with those knowledge and skills, it can make a big difference for Pueblo. And sort of we can continue to build on this cycle. We can establish a culture, right, in our local area where family engagement is the thing. And this is the norm, and this is what we want to have happen. And so that's sort of what we're trying to push for, is more and more and more to build it up. And just like other people have said, there are some key parts to this. I think, one thing that our students can really grab onto is building relationships, right, with students. And that's what they love about it the most. And I think when they understand that they can build relationships with the families, that's an even more powerful thing. And so what other folks have said about the going out to the families and understanding their hopes and concerns and suggestions and doing that asset analysis, it's really key. And so we have them participate in those, surveys and parent-teacher organizations, but it's always about going out to them and not always bringing, them to us. We're definitely focusing more on going out now than we used to. We also do the same kind of things with making sure parents are aware of available services. So our students also participate in making sure that they develop these maps that were mentioned of resources, the community walks, the pools of knowledge kinds of approaches that we've all heard about. So that's all the same kind of thing that we do at CSU Pueblo as well. We obviously want them to learn as much about the cultures as possible, because that's what builds those relationships and will keep it kind of going. The other big part, which I think was also mentioned by a couple people that we focus on extensively, is reflection. Lots of personal reflection by our candidates to sort of track their biases and the evolution of their philosophy about this topic in particular, so that they are acutely aware of sort of where they are and how they fit into this big picture that we have. So hopefully that wasn't too abbreviated and was worthwhile, but I'll cut it off there.
Very worthwhile. Thank you, Jeff. Cindy?
Yeah, I think, a trend or a theme I think you're starting to hear is just an incredible level of intentionality by our programs, of really trying to imagine what does it take to really support a candidate translating these mindsets about working with diverse learners into the kinds of instructional strategies, approaches, the ways they operate within their school and into practice. And I think one of the things that has been really important in our work that we've done at CU Denver is this thread never goes away, right? It's in every single class. So even when you're in your methods class and you're in your final capstone course where they're creating those teacher work sample like units, those sorts of things. There are incredibly intentional questions in the planning guides for those of, what are the funds of knowledge that you're going to tap into? What are the cultural community pieces of wealth that are there for you to tap into around this topic? So those threads never go away. It's not something you learned about first and then now you're in the mix of it and you're so heated of, trying to figure out how to design your lessons and those sorts of things. It is just something that we elevate throughout that whole cycle of planning, teaching, monitoring, adjusting, reflecting, and next steps. And that the lens they're constantly looking through to reflect and to engage their work is really recognizing the assets of the children and the families that they work with. I think another thing that is helpful too is, particularly for pre-service teachers who are so new to the context, they come with this lens of my job is within the four walls of this classroom or within the screen of a Zoom at the moment, right? And they don't always know that systemic level that Kelly was talking about. And the more that we can do, I think, even to expose pre-service teachers to the systemic aspects about how schools are organized, how policies are driven in those places, look at and look through a critical lens of the family community engagement practices at this professional development school that you're in. Where are the promising possibilities and where are the gaps, so that they can constantly make sure that they're not just operating in this individualistic nature, that we have to root out the systemic aspects around equity and diversity, that we all have to contribute to undoing those.
So true. Thank you, Cindy. Liz.
So I want to definitely echo both the sentiments of Jeff and Cindy and this idea of systems. And I might just push it a little bit further in thinking about the systems kind of that all work together. So when we talk about really going through culturally responsive practices and anti-racist behaviors and the different things we need to do, because we have a workforce in Colorado that is 87% white for our teachers. I would say probably up in the mountains where I am, it's even higher. Although our CMC students are fairly diverse in the sense that probably 50% of our teacher candidates are either identify as Latinx or BIPOC. And so we're putting a more diverse workforce out there, and we want to make sure that their experience as they're becoming teachers is culturally responsive. So we've been working with our mentor teachers in our program to help them be more culturally responsive to our student teachers. Many of them are white. There are not a lot of diverse teachers in our workforces yet in the mountains. So we want to make sure that our student teachers have mentors who have asset-based thinking about them as future teachers. We also want to make sure that's what we're teaching in the courses for our own students, to have that asset-based thinking about their future students. And so we just want to see this system within what we have as a locus of control in the college, but then we also want to see it in our districts, however we can influence that. Sometimes when you're in the system, you can't see it because there's so much similarity of the people in the system, but we really want to make sure, I mean, we have to, this is the charge of our nation, is to diversify our teaching workforce and make sure that there are supports in place to embrace that equity and diversity and inclusivity work that we need to do. I had one other thing I was going to say, but I don't want to take up much more time. So anyway, I'm stretching by what kind of training are we doing with our mentors who are working with our student teachers in that work as well.
That's awesome. That is really important. I hadn't thought about that, Liz. Thank you. Angela.
Okay, thanks. And so I think, again, echoing what folks have said, that maybe I'll add the concept of building the lens for our teacher candidates to see themselves as teacher, as researcher, right? That we know that the commitment and the work to diversity, equity, and inclusion is a career-long process, and that it's important to have the skills that every time that you start in your school year or you have a new child or family placed in your classroom, that you do the good work and study and work with the families and learn to ask the right questions. And what that takes and really requires is the teacher development program, that there's an alignment, that you transform your curriculum. So those, I think a popular word that we've heard this morning is thread, right? That these concepts are threaded throughout the program so that teacher candidates have multiple and iterative opportunities to try out these practices. And so I think that lens of teacher as researcher is really important when sending teacher candidates out into the field, both as a teacher candidate, but as a licensed teacher. And then again, just echoing the importance of reflection, that it's important to be able to name what you're doing really well in your teaching practice, but also have, being vulnerable and naming the things that you might need to set goals for or reach out and identify some key professional development areas. So I think my add-on to that is thinking about teacher development and teacher as researcher and what that means and supporting children in the context of their families. Yeah.
Excellent, Angela, thank you. Kimberly, please.
I want to start by saying I loved Liz's mentioning of really thinking about how we approach the mentor teacher training. That's something I know Relay is considering right now, how we revising how we train our mentor teachers. So I would love to chat more about that. It's really awesome. When I think about like transferring what are different activities and different coursework pushes our students to do and how it would transfer beyond the 2 years with us, I think this really boils down to what a lot of people are saying around really grounding our teacher candidates in the why, the rationale behind building relationships with families, and really also that metacognition piece, so reflecting on the impact, as well as building mindsets. So my example of this, I mentioned that we have that distance learning toolkit that we shared with all of our teachers, and in that toolkit there's one resource that there's one.
Come up here. You're not grabbing one from back.
There's one resource that suggests multilingual surveys and making sure that you use at least three methods of communication to outreach to families. And when we work with our teachers on thinking about why this is important, we start to have conversations and have our students explore that asset-based approach to language and the pitfalls of having those deficit mindsets. And that mindset is what transfers later into their classrooms. And then when we have teachers reflect on the impact of the use of those types of surveys, we start to see that they realize how more equitable outreach leads to better outcomes for their students. And then this transfers into making connections with providing students with all types of equitable instruction. And so people mentioned that mindsets are really going to be what pushes beyond those 2 years too. And so one example I have that just from this last class we taught was around crucial conversations. So for that class, we actually really reframe this idea of having crucial conversations with families as opportunities to strengthen relationships. And so we talk with our teacher candidates through a potential framework that they can use that really helps them develop empathy and practice perspective taking, knowing that that perspective building approach is a real strong de-biasing technique, which connects to their earlier work on identity and bias, knowing that that is the mindset we want them to leave us with.
That's great, Kimberly, thank you. We have just a couple minutes left, and Kelly, I for sure want to hear from you, but if anybody needs to drop off, please know we are re-recording this, and I'll share it with you and the PowerPoint so you understand the questions. But also, yeah, you'll be able to check back about that, but if you can stick with this, I'd love to hear from you, please, Kelly.
Sure. I was just going to quickly build off of what Angela was saying about teacher as researcher. And we do that within our programs. And the other thing that we try to do with positionality is talking about teacher as learner. So teacher as learner of both their students, their families, and the communities in which they work. So shifting that power and the perspective there is really critical to some of the work that they are doing. And then the other piece was teacher as advocate and what that might look like in their different positions. So the in-service teachers, how do they disrupt deficit thinking within the context that they work in, and how do they advocate for asset-based thinking that draws on the community's cultural wealth and funds of knowledge. So those are just a couple of things. I knew I only had a couple minutes, so I was trying to just build it in with what you already have. So there you go.
Thanks, Kelly. Thank you all so much. I had one more question if we had time, and we don't, but if you've already, our panelists have kind of thought of some of these ideas, if you don't mind just sending me a quick email and sharing if you prepared something for question 3, I can see about sharing that when I share the video and the PowerPoint. For our attendees, here's the emails of all of our panelists. I hope that's okay, panelists. I didn't ask first, but in the spirit of educators, I'm sure you're with me on this. And thank you all so much for your time and attention to this important topic. I look forward to learning more from you soon. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
We're going to have to go back